Evening. Can you hear me? Baruch, can you hear me? I can't hear you, but fine. Good. Okay. So I want to start off this year, first of all, with a Mazel Tov to Mishpachas Potash and Rabin. Pinchas Rabin is online, I see, and the birth of a grandson in Manchester to Yankel and I believe it's Sterny. So and a lot of nachas to Charchova. As we always start off with Tehillim, particularly I want to mention Menachem Dov Chaim Halevi ben Chai Gittel and his daughter Dver Leah Bas Hannah Rivka should have her four shleima. So we'll say Kapitel Chof and then we'll start the Tehillim, the Shir. Lam Natseach Mizbel David Ya'ancho Adonai v'Yemsoro Yisagev Hashem Elohei Yaakov Yishlach Ezracha Mikodesh Umitzia Yisadeka Yizkar Kol Min Chaysecha V'Elosecha Yidash Nesela Yitin Lecha Chilovecha V'Chol Atzasecha Yimale Nedanena V'Shvosecha Ov'Shem Eloheinu Nidgel Yimale Adonai Kol Mishalesecha Ati Yodati Ki Hishia Adonai Mishichoi Yanehu Mishmei Kodshei B'Gvureis Yesha Yiminoi Ele V'Orechem V'Ele V'Asusim Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Nazkir Hey Makor Uv and Follow Anachnu Kamnu Vanis Eidod Adonai Yeshua Melech Yaneinu Yem Korenis. So let's go to our shir. Before we start the shir, I had a simcha this week. I want to share with you that the reprint of Chelik Aleph and Mesivim B'Stei Shlichus arrived. I have a few copies here. My son was in New York. He brought a box of them, so I've got a few available. Let's get on to our shir. Right. So now, in Hayom Yom, it's mentioned for Chav Beis Sivan that we kiss the Tzitzis 6 times when in Shema, by the mention of the word Tzitzis 3 times, but the word of emes, which is the end of the Shema. Ramesh Alav Shalom used to say, Moshe Rabbeinu hat nicht gesagt dem emes. The word emes is not from Torah's Moshe. It's from the Broch of emes v'yatziv. So now, then we kiss the tzitzis by the word emes, then by the word kayemes, and by the word lo'ad. And what's the significance? Why is the tzitzis? Why do we kiss the tzitzis by those 2 words of kayemes and lo'ad? Let's just see whether. So here we have on to the left of the page, you have here, this is from Rabbi Yaakov Emden's Siddur, which was published by himself in the year Tov Kuf Hey, which is approximately the year around the time when the Alter Rebbe was born. And here it says you should kiss the tzitzis to nashik ha-tzitzis v'tanichem miyodcha. Kiss the tzitzis by la'ad kayemes. Over the page, we have here, this is from the Siddur HaArizal, a tribute, which is one of the various editions. This is from Reb Shabsi Mirashko. And here he goes into, if you can see, we have underlined, when you should reach B'nai Chmodim La'ad, then you should kiss the tzitzis and then you leave them from your hand. What is the significance of this? Is that the word Lo'ad is Gematria 104. Lo'ad, twice Lo'ad, is the Gematria, is the word Kodkoid, which is the skull. On a very simple level, without going into the Kabbalah, which you have on the page here, on a very simple level, the tzitzis is a fringe. And so the tzitzis is a fringe going out of the head. And so the tzitzis of the beged is the idea you've got the square and you're reaching beyond the square. And so you've got the kodkoid and then the tzitzis are reaching out of that. That's on a very simple level. Here, he's going into pure Kabbalah and Gematrias, where 26 and 26 equals 52, and twice that equals 104. And so Kodkoid is 8 times Shema Vaya, if that's the right cheshbon. So he's talking here about Al Pikabola, but this is clearly that the reason for kissing the tzitzis by the La'ad Kayemes and by Nechmodun La'ad relates to the union of the word La'ad, which comes up both places, and the two La'ads together make up the word Kodkoid, and that's the reason for kissing the tzitzis at those points. Now, the question is on the Hayoim Yoim. If the emphasis is on the word Lo'ad rather than the word Kayemes, so then it should have been Tzitzis, Tzitzis, Emes, Lo'ad Kayemes, and Lo'ad. Right? Like Kayemes is the end of the sentence. So someone alerted me to, before the Hayoim Yom was printed, we've got work which the Rebbe did to prepare the Siddur Torah. As soon as the Rebbe got off the boat, literally, got off the boat, Chof Ches Sivan, he arrived in America, Tofshin Aleph, 1941. And by Rosh Hashanah, there was a new Siddur Torah had been published in time for Rosh Hashanah. And he worked on it. And he says, the Rebbe, as in the Frierdiker Rebbe, was in Morristown at the time. And the Rebbe, our Rebbe, had the opportunity to check lots of details with his father-in-law. And so what we have the Rishimas which the Rebbe wrote at the time. And here we have in front of you 2 Rishimas from that period. Neshikas HaTzitzis, Emes, Lo'ad Kayemes, Lo'ad, or L'Yel Me'elam. And then a second Rishima, which is also in that same book of Hagos Hasidah, which was published about 5 years ago, from the Rebbe's notes back in 1941. Again, kissing the tzitzis 6 times, 3 times by the word tzitzis, word emes, Lo'ad Kayemes, Lo'ad L'Yel Me'elam. So this is a precursor to the Hayoim Yoim, and here it does emphasize Lo'ad Kayemes. So it is curious why the word Lo'ad was dropped in the Hayoim Yoim, unless it just wants to save space. Could be, I don't know. One other thing is that the fact that we kiss the tzitzis by the word emes doesn't seem to have a very strong early source. The Malaktim give a reference to Ksos HaShulchan. As we know, Ksos HaShulchan is from Reb Chaim Noah, who was a Lubavitcher, who lived about 60 years ago, 60, 70 years ago, more likely. So in his Ksos HaShulchan, he says that minhag is to kiss the tzitzis by emes. It doesn't give a reason for it. And so I don't have a reason for, unless you say, it's like we've finished the parsha of tzitzis, and so it's like bidding farewell from the parsha of tzitzis, so we kiss it by the word emes. I don't know. Perhaps there is something between the word emes and the word kayemes. That could be. But if someone asked me the simple question, why do we kiss the tzitzis twice in emes v'yatziv? It's got to do with, as you see clearly in the Kisvei Arizal, it's got to do with the words lo'ad and lo'ad, which make up the gematria of kodkoid and the kavanas which are associated with that. Let's move on. Very timely question. Someone asked me this week, and we know that the Rebbe encouraged B'dikas Tefillin and Mezuzahs was a very common answer of the Rebbe. So that any shaila you had, or but many times people had a question about this. And the Rebbe said B'dikas Tefillin and Mezuzahs. But there was also, I'm not going to go into the whole story, but the Rebbe would refer to the Sefer Mate Ephraim, which says that during Elul is a time for preparing yourself for Rosh Hashanah, etc. And he says you should also be biting your tefillin during Elul. So Elul is a time where, and actually if someone had asked a question, the Rebbe said, B'dikas tefillin mezuzahs, if they had checked them within the last 12 months, the Rebbe said you wouldn't have to check them again. Okay, so now is the question, Sofrim who check mezuzahs and tefillin, they also have to feed families, and they're entitled to get paid for their work, for their time. So are you allowed to use your Maaser money for paying for the B'dikas tefillin and mezuzahs? So now, what I've got here in front of you is the Shulchan Aruch, Hilchos Tzedakah, and Yeridei Asim Reish Mem Tes. And we have this idea of giving Maaser. And, okay, there's a question whether Maaser is min Torah, midrabanon, minhag. But then the Ramah says the following: Ve'ein lasis mi Maaser sheloi devar mitzvah. You shouldn't use your Maaser money for a mitzvah, not for poor people. The Ramah says no, Maaser money should be given to the poor. So this is the opinion of the Ramah, who lived 450 years ago approximately, that the Maaser money should be used exclusively for the poor. Then we have here on the side, the Shach brings from the Marshal, who was a contemporary of the Ramah, cousin of the Arizal, and he says, he quotes from an earlier source, Kol mitzvah shetova liyodo k'ganias balbris salahachnis chosim v'kala l'chupa v'kehai gavno. You can use your Maaser money for mitzvah opportunities which have come your way. Also, sforim, to learn from them and to lend them to others. And one important note: Im lo hoyo yecholes beyodoi v'lo hoyo oisa mitzvah. If there's a mitzvah opportunity and you can't afford to do that mitzvah other than using your Maaser money, then you are allowed to use your Maaser money for those mitzvahs. So that we have then two opinions. One is saying Maaser money is exclusively to be given for the poor. Then we have the shitta of the other poskim who say Maaser money can be used for other mitzvahs if otherwise you wouldn't be able to do that. And indeed, the Alter Rebbe, although we don't have Hilchos Tzedakah from the Alter Rebbe, but it's kind of comes into Dinei Birchas Hane'enin, the end of Perik Yud Beis, and when you have a simcha, so that you can say a bracha shechiyonu b'chiyamonu yigiyonu lizman hazeh, celebrating the simcha. If it's a simcha which is shared with others, then the bracha to celebrate would be hatoiv v'hameitiv. Hatoiv for yourself, v'hameitiv, and it's also for others. Now, if you found a treasure, found a large sum of money, so then it's a celebration not only for yourself, it's also for others. Because if you win the pools, you can only win the pools if you bought a ticket, yeah. But if you win, if you have a big find, so then it's a benefit not only for yourself, because the Jewish community has become wealthier, which means, if your uncle has become a millionaire, so then the poor people will be able to get a more tzedakah, because tzedakah is going according to your means. If your uncle has become a man of great means, so then the poor people will have a greater resource for tzedakah. Then he says, Masha'ein kain, when someone inherits, his father passed away, and he inherits a fortune. So then the bracha is shechiyonu, not hatoiv v'hameitiv. You're going to say the community has become wealthier? It's not true. The community is just as wealthy as it was before. It's just it happened to be before in the father's hands, and now it's in the son's hands. You're going to say the son has to give Maaser. Maaser shiafrish ben, he can spend it on other mitzvahs. So you see that the Alter Rebbe is following the opinion of the Marshal that Maaser could be used for other mitzvahs, and that seems to be the general minhag, that Maaser could be used for other mitzvahs and that we saw before, if you can't afford to do those mitzvahs otherwise. And so coming back therefore to the question of can you use your Maaser money to be buried at your tefillin and mezuzahs, it's a good thing to do. It's an optional mitzvah. You can't use your Maaser money to buy a mezuzah for yourself, because you cannot pay your debts, you cannot pay your dues from your Maaser money. That's true. So you can't use your Maaser money we're not going to go to tuition, which is a whole discussion on its own, but anything which you are mechuyev to do, you can't use your Maaser money. But checking the tefillin during Elul is a hidur mitzvah, and therefore you are allowed to use your Maaser money for doing so if you cannot do it otherwise. Let's move on to the next question. Interesting question. I got this And these are all real questions, which happened this week. Someone, not in this country, so don't send the police after them. Reuven asks his rabbi that Shimon owes me a lot of money, and Shimon is not the kind of guy who's going to go to listen to a besdin, and probably is the kind of money which he couldn't get in court either. Can I get some toughies to rattle his bones a little bit? Am I allowed to? Well, can I threaten at least? Can I threaten to break his bones to be able to get him to cough up the money? So he's asking the Rav. He's allowed to get some toughies to threaten his debtor to pay up. So here we have first quote you have on the screen is from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch in Dinig Nizke Guva Nefesh. The second one is from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch Hilchos Gezela. And so we're going to look at the two quotes. So we have the Isur Osur L'Odom Lahakus Es Chaveiro. It is forbidden to strike another person, another yid. The Mekor Oivim Beloisase, if you strike another yid, you are violating a negative commandment. It says in Bin Hakus Arosho, Lo Yosef, Pen Yosef. The Torah says that even the Besdin, they mustn't administer an extra lash for a person who's already on the bench for deserving malchus. So that's the first thing. So to strike another yid is forbidden. It's aveira. Then v'chol meidim yad al chaveira. We all know this from Rashi in Parshas Shmos. If one raises his hand to strike his fellow, even though he didn't actually strike, just he raises his hand poised to strike, he's also called a Rasha. So not only to hit another yid, even to raise your hand in order to strike is also comes into an Issa Minato. So then I wrote this back to I wasn't asked by Reuven, it was his rabbi who asked me. And his rabbi says, what about Ovid Inish Dino Lanafshi? There is a concept that you are allowed to take the law into your own hands in certain circumstances. So why is it not allowed for Reuven to take the law in his, because he's not going to get money out of the best that we said. He's allowed to use, why can't he use force to get what he's entitled to get? So this is where we split. It's a change to Hilchos Gezela. And we read in this again, Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, that which was said in the previous paragraph, you're not allowed to take the law into your own hands. If you claim that you're owed so much money and you want to take collateral, you want to take a valuable of the person in order to settle a debt, then you're not allowed to go and take it on your own. We're not talking about the original article, which was taken from you illegally. But to retrieve your very own article, which that fellow had taken from you, in stealth or an outright robbery, if someone stole my bicycle, I go past the house and I see my bicycle there, so I'm allowed to take him. I'm allowed to take back my bicycle. I'm not stealing my bicycle when I retrieve it. I'm retrieving, I'm saving my own. And if the thief refuses to let me take my bicycle, I am allowed to strike him so that he should leave go of my goods and I should be able to take it home. If I cannot retrieve it without striking him, then I would be allowed to strike him. So here we are very clear that there's a difference when we say the principle, the rule of Ovid Inish Dina Lanafshe. You are allowed to take the law into your own hands. That's only when you wish to retrieve the very same article, which is your original property. But when it's to settle monies which are owed to you, you're not allowed to take the law into your own hands. So that's basically the halacha. And we wish Reuven every success, that he should be able to retrieve his money from the debtor in a legal way. One of our regular listeners sent me this picture. I want to just say that wearing this is a tzitzis garment made of some kind of polyester, I think. I want to say that's not muhuder to use polyester begodim. B'chal Chassidish Yidden prefer to use woolen garments, but that's not the question which we're dealing with. We're dealing with, he first asked me, as you can see, the tzitzis thread has been snapped mostly, but there's one little strand left. Now, as we know, sometimes if the tzitzis threads snap, the whole tzitzis is invalid. Sometimes it's not invalid yet, and you can tie a knot and repair, and maybe before it gets beyond repair. So he's asking now whether this is still retrievable, or in this picture where you have this very thin strand. Now the tzitzis, our tzitzis generally, the Mehudadika tzitzis, are made with 8 strands, and we've got the expression of kofel shmoina. Not going to go into discussion where that comes from, but so of the 8 thin strands which make up the tzitzis, there's one strand which is holding it together. So yes, we all know there's the expression, the Gemara, harorim hatuluyim besairo, mountains hanging on a thread, etc. We do have, and also is mentioned in Tanya about one thread, etc. But we're learning Hilchos Tzitzis now. So now, does that one thread allow us to say, well, it hasn't snapped totally, and we can still salvage the situation? So at first I thought you could, and then because of this shear, so I have a nice picture, and so then I wanted to look at use it for the shear. So I looked at the halacha and I saw I would be mistaken. You cannot retrieve it. And let's read why. So here we have from Hilchos Tzitzis, Siman Yud Beis, Kol chut miches chutin shenisparek mishazirosai. If the threads of tzitzis are spun, are twisted together, if they have become untwisted, you ready? So Ben, a little bit. So he says, since tzitzis which are not twisted together, or whatever the word is, how you translate the word shazira. So he says the following: the part of the thread which has been unraveled, an unraveled tzitzis is as if it's not there. So now let's say, if your tzitzis are snapped, if there's a certain length left, then it's still kosher. Now what happens if that length is there, but it's unraveled? Well, I'm sorry, that doesn't count. Unraveled threads do not count as kosher tzitzis. And therefore, coming back to our picture, because it's become unraveled, it's as if it's not there, and you would have to take out the whole tzitzis and start all over again. I'm talking about for this corner. He mentions then the second paragraph, there's a little bit of leniency, but in principle, basically, an unraveled thread is an invalid thread, and it's possible. Let's move on. Okay. Someone came over to me this week, and he said he had the shaila. It's holiday time, so we can be forgiven for waking up a little bit later, and he's in the middle of davening, and he realized, whoops, he looked at the luach on the wall, and he saw that Sof Zman Kriya Shema is in 3 minutes from now. And it takes him 7 minutes to say Psukkah Zimra. I'm not asking for a show of hands. So now, if he'll say Psukkah Zimra at his normal pace, by the time he gets to Shema, it's going to be too late. So now he's got this urgency. So the way he described it, he just pressed on the accelerator and he zoomed through to get till what should he have done? And the answer is you stop where you are and you say Shema in middle of Psukkah Zimra, middle of Ashrei, middle of Halukah. You go between paragraph and that next one, better to to pull over to the hard shoulder when possible. But you'd say Shema right there in middle of Psukkah Zimra. And so the source for this, we know the Mishnah. You are allowed to interrupt even in Shema and Birchas Krishma out of respect or etc. And so to say Shema, because it's a mitzvah of the Eibishter, a mitzvah in the Torah, for sure it qualifies as something to interrupt for. So now let's read the Lashon of this is actually the Mishnah Berurah. The Alter Rebbe doesn't spell this point out. Poshut de'im misyore she yaver zman krishme koidem sheyigia likrosa b'seder hatfilo. If you realize that by the time you get to Shema in the order of the davening, it will be too late. You are allowed to interrupt. Then the next point is actually interesting. I want to share it with you also. He says, what happens if you didn't say Birchas HaTorah? You came to shul late, and people say, didn't say brachas earlier, comes to shul, and he's in the middle of Psukkah Zimra, and you realize, oops, I didn't say Birchas HaTorah. And he's saying now, Psukkah Zimra is Tehillim, it's part of Torah. So the Mishnah Berurah says he's allowed to stop in the middle of Psukkah Zimra to say Birchas HaTorah. And then he says, this I found very interesting, in other words, we say after we say Birchas HaTorah, we say Yivarechecha, Birchas HaKohanim. So he says you'd be allowed to say those even though you're in the middle of Birchas, in the middle of Psukkah Zimra. Because what's the urgency? Because although you're saying Psukkah Zimra as prayer rather than as limud, there are those who say you can't say Psukkah Zimra before saying Birchas HaTorah. All right, so this is a clear halacha. If you didn't say Shema and you realize, and the time is very short, and you're in the middle of Psukkah Zimra, you'd stop short and you'd say Shema there and then. I want to just throw in, I once had a shaila, someone had come, a pikuach nefesh shaila, perhaps I mentioned it at the shir. I was in the middle of, it was a Shabbos morning. I was upset that they asked a shaila, but that's another story. So pikuach nefesh, you don't ask questions, but they asked the question, and I was in the middle of Psukkah Zimra, so I written Shulchan Aruch. So I stopped. I said Baruch Hashem li'olam amen v'amen. Listened to what they had to say, answered what I had to answer, then went back to my place, said Baruch Hashem li'olam amen v'amen, and continued where I had left off. Now that's written in Shulchan Aruch. If you are for some urgent reason you have to interrupt in the middle of Psukkah Zimra, so you could do like a bracha achroina of sorts by saying Baruch Hashem li'olam amen, that paragraph, and then you resume, and that becomes your bracha rishona. You recite it again, and that becomes your bracha rishona. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, so also someone this week turns to me, he says, I just realized he had just taken off his talis. Sorry, he'd taken off his tefillin, he still was wearing his talis. I just realized last night I didn't daven Ma'ariv. What should I do now? So I said, say the extra from Nesra now. And so let's read this carefully. I hesitated, but that's what I told him, and I wanted to substantiate that is the halacha. So now this is in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch Sim Kuf Ches, that the idea that if you missed out at tefillah, you can compensate in the next, you can make up later. So the most Rishonim say you can only compensate at the next prayer slot. B'zman tefillah and hasmuchala, 2 points. At the next, you can only say your compensatory tefillah in a slot of tefillah, and that slot has to be the next slot which becomes available. You can't do a tashlumin stamazeh. So he gives an example. Let's say you forgot Ma'ariv and you daven at Shachris at 8 o'clock, and at 11 o'clock you started thinking, oh, I didn't daven Ma'ariv last night. You can't daven your extra Shemona Esrei at 11 o'clock. Letashlumin tefillah shehifsid. The fisha lo tiknu tashlumin letefillah shehifsid elo bizman she'osek b'tefillah sheyichoy v'sho. Since you are still active now in davening. For now is the time you can also piggyback, if that's the right word. You can also do your tashlumin now. Because you are in the mode of tefillah, you are allowed to make up for that which you missed out. So my hesitation was he'd already taken off his tefillin, but I still feel that he was still wearing his talis. It's not as if I mean, here he says, Shor Harbe. It wasn't a large portion. On the contrary, you have in Hilchos Mila on Shabbos, you have Tzitzis and Ma'akvin Zatfilo. But if you're Ba'ode Osuk, I think if a person still wearing his talis, even though he's taken off his tefillin, he's still connected with his davening, and I felt it was justified. There are those who say it has to be in a zman tefillah, but that's another discussion. I felt that weighing up, I felt it was justified. It's still called osik mitfillah. Right, let's move on. I'm sharing this with you because it seems to be not such a well-known halacha. Someone overseas asked me a question. Turns out they're going to have to move house, and their deadline works out in the middle of Sukkot. So, and if they don't move out, it's going to cost them a lot of money. So, are they allowed to move house during Chol HaMoed? So I said it's a mefurish din in Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchos Chol HaMoed. The thing is that Hilchos Chol HaMoed is not such a popular limud, but there we have it in it's obviously halacha in Mishnah. Ein mefanim lechotzer lechotzer. You're not allowed to move from one yard to another, one complex to another. And then he talks about if you want to move from one flat to another flat within the same complex, then that would be okay, etc., etc. Then there is moving from rented premises to your own premises. Then there are that Sif Bey says that would be allowed according to some. But just to move from one rental premises to another premises on Chol HaMoed, that's something certainly which is not allowed l'chatchila. What would happen if there was an emergency? We'll have to deal with it, but certainly not to schedule it that way. Yeah, I can understand. Shliach is before Sukkot is busy with so many other activities. It's not the time you want to start spending on moving house, but you can't do it in Chol HaMoed. That's I'm afraid. Okay. Now, I started learning these halachas this week about Sukkah. The time of the year, yeah. But particularly, then someone actually came and asked me this child. Now, I apologize for the quality of the picture. It's not my camera. So now, if you look at the photograph, you can see that to the right of it, you can see these bamboos. And then the bamboos reach till here. And then you go up and you can see there's the concrete jutting out. So there's a concrete ledge jutting out. And that is not at the same level as the schach. The schach is down here, and I don't know, 1 foot or more higher up, going up, there is this ledge jutting out. And so the question is this an acceptable situation to count this wall where I'm pointing to at the left of the picture? Can that count as a wall of the sukkah? Whether he has 3 walls or 4 walls, that's another discussion. But meanwhile, we want to look at this, whether it's acceptable. So because to make up for the lack of quality of the photograph, we have a diagram, thanks to the Sefer Piskei Teshuvos at the back of the volume Vov, on Hilchos Sukkah, etc. He has these diagrams, and this is the similar situation where we've got a ledge overhanging the sukkah. And so what's the issue here? We all know that there's a concept called doifun akuma, this very interesting halacha, which says that if the gap in the ceiling is less than 4 amos away from the wall, so we consider the ceiling as part of the wall and the sukkah is kosher. You cannot sit under this overhang, but the wall, so let's point to the diagram, this wall is somehow considered to be next to the sukkah, and your sukkah is kosher. That's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, doifun akuma. It's unique to mitzvah sukkah. There is a Ran which is brought in Magen Avram, and Kiva Eger discusses it at length, that you cannot use two lomdas, two halachas in one setting, in one flow. You can, in other words, we've got various halacha shortcuts. Then we have a concept called good achis or good asik, where we can fill in a vertical gap, and we say as if that gap is closed. So that's, you will use the word good asik, which means to go up, or good achis, to bring down. So sometimes we'll have a sukkah which the walls are 10 tefachim high, and then it's open, and then there's the schach. That would be acceptable using the concept of good asik. Here, but let's explain something very, very important. Really, the walls of the sukkah have to reach the schach. Now, of course, we've got lomdas, we've got various halachas which allow it to reach, not physically, but through the halacha. So, all right. So how does this wall reach the schach? Well, it's going to have to use dofen akuma. Hang on a second. Dofen akuma still, it's up there. That doesn't really reach the schach, because you can't do dofen akuma through open air. It has to be something solid. So that we're going to use this jutting out overhang. But for that to connect with the schach, you're going to have to use another lomdas. We'll call it good achis or good asik. In other words, you're using two lomdas in one flow. And that, according to the Ran, is not acceptable. Others disagree. The Taz Paschal is like the others, but the Magen Avraham does bring this, and so lechatchila we should be taking this. So therefore, coming back to this question of the Shiloh over here, what I told the fellow is with this pictured sukkah, if you would take some plastic and just fill in that gap, and so over here where that concrete is there, don't have to have schach there, but put plastic, put cloth, something, just fill it in, so then you don't have to use the overhang up there for your dofen akuma, because you've got a plastic over here. That's going to be the dofen akuma. In that way, your sukkah is kosher. Right. Okay. Let's move on, because there is an article which was published several years ago here in London about these sukkahs which people build in their extensions, and they use the walls of the kitchen to be the walls of the sukkah. What about the fact that there's in between, there are kitchen counters and kitchen cabinets? Do they interfere? I want to just share with you one other hesitation. It's also now become very popular. People build an island in their kitchen. Now, sometimes the islands are actually quite tall. So could the island serve as a wall of the sukkah? Now, typically the island has, well, sometimes the island is just like a tall table, so there's no wall at all, so then forget it. Then you can't use the island at all. But let's say the island does have cupboards. Very good. So then that counts as a wall. But then there's a tabletop. Here's the island, then you've got a tabletop sticking out 9 inches, whatever, for people to be able to sit at. You can't sit at a cupboard. So they've got you've got this tabletop. Does the tabletop interfere with the ability to do a good asik, to take the walls of this cupboard of the island, or you want to say it goes to the top, but there's this table in between which interrupts. So there's room for discussion on that, and we're going to leave that for another time. Right. Question number 9 was sad question. Unfortunately, it's not so uncommon. Fellow got married, and the marriage did not last very long, and so he's now single again. Young man, looks young. He doesn't want to look like a married man. He doesn't want to wear a talis. He doesn't want to wear kapot on Shabbos. Is he allowed to stop wearing a talis? Is he allowed to stop wearing a kapot on Shabbos? And it comes into a question of neder, of hatoras nedarim. And so I spent a long time on this. I don't claim great expertise in hilchos nedarim. And what I would say is there's two forms of undoing a vow, which we're going to discuss for the moment. And one is al yedei charota, and one is al yedei pesach. One is to say, I regret having made this vow. Another one is by saying, well, I only made the vow for this, but not for that, and somehow to find a loophole to invalidate, to undo the vow. Hilchos nedarim are very complicated, and generally the way it's advised in Shulchan Aruch that you'd have to do a Pesach and a Charota, even when a person has a genuine Charota, but you'd also try to find a Pesach. But then we have another problem, that you could only undo a vow which is Dover Reshus, but if it's a mitzvah, it's more difficult to undo such a vow. And to wear a talus for davening is a kind of mitzvah. I know you don't have to, but it is a form of mitzvah. It's an upgrade. You have various instances. If a father starting giving a machzis shekel every year on behalf of his child, he has to continue until the child becomes able to pay their own machzis shekel. You have various cases where a person started a mitzvah. He didn't have to, but he started a mitzvah. It's not so posh that you could undo it. If a person was Makabel Shabbos early, but now they want to change, can they do hatoras nedarim to undo their Kabbalah Shabbos? It's complicated. And so I'm a little bit hesitant. I answered, you need to have hatoras nedarim, but I'm not so sure whether hatoras nedarim would be allowable because it's a dvar mitzvah. It's ironic. I've heard of bochurim who are getting on, and they felt embarrassed to be in shul not wearing a talus, so they wear a talus that people shouldn't, think that they are still single. Here it's the other way around. He wants to take off his talus. The one wearing a kapot is obviously much less of a consideration because it's a fine minig Yisrael, but it's not the same level as wearing a talus for davening. Perhaps there's more room there to say, had he realized that his marriage wouldn't last, so then he wouldn't have committed himself to wear a kapot on Shabbos. I don't know, but it's a complicated one, so I don't have a simple answer. So I'm hesitant on that. I wanted to share my hesitation. Okay, then I got to hear a question. Nephew of mine on Shlichus, and he's asking about plastic tablecloths on a roll. Are you allowed to tear them off on Shabbos? So let's read this halacha carefully. We have a couple of minutes. Now, we all know that one of the lamates halachas is koireya. And then we have another one of them, which is tearing. Then we have another one of the lamates halachas is mechatech. Now, to explain, mechatech means to cut, to slice. That is, if you are a cobbler, if you're not sure what cobbler is, a cobbler is a shoemaker. If you have a piece of leather and you want to make a pair of sandals or a pair of shoes, so you have a pattern and you then make lines and then you cut the sheet of leather into a certain shape and then you stitch it together and you create a pair of sandals, create a pair of shoes, etc. So that is where the malach of mechatech is. Mechatech b'midah, you're cutting according to a line and you're very precise the way you cut. That is the malach of mechatech, which is one of the lamates malachas. Now, but just cutting without needing a precise measurement doesn't fall into the malach of mechatech. So let's read that inside. This is from Tzimmushin Mem, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Afal pi shemechatichas tolush muteres lechatchila she'einu makbid lechatcha b'midvo. If you're not, you don't need to cut mamish to size. This could be a bit of an approximation. That's not called mechatech. Mikol makom im al yedei ze metakno liyishtamish bo ze tashmish chay mitum shum tikun kli im mechatche b'sak. But if it was not usable before for a particular purpose, and now by cutting it, it's now become usable for that purpose. That also comes into tikkun keli. That's if you use a knife to cut it. Let's say you take a piece of wood and you whittle it with a blade to create a toothpick. So then you're metaken keli, you've made a toothpick out of a twig. That would be a melocha derais of tikkun keli, makabapatish, etc. If you didn't use a knife and you cut it to size, tore it to size, that's potur aval osu. So let's say you have a large sheet of tissue and you want to blow your nose, but it's not comfortable to use a square meter of tissue to blow your nose. So you tear off a 6-inch square. So that would be a tikkun keli midrabanon. That's what he says over here. Ein shoyvin es acheres, ve'in koiris hanyor hamatorah metiltu. You're not allowed to tear a piece of paper, which is not muksa for whatever reason. If you want to tear a piece off a large piece of paper to use it for something, so a kitchen roll, to tear off a piece of tissue to wipe something, so to tear it off, to have a useful size is an issue of midrabanon of v'taken kli. And it's a bit uncomfortable, but let's see if you're stuck in a case where you have there's no cut up toilet paper. So then to tear off a piece for wiping, that would be an issur d'rabbanan because you're making something usable. It's not comfortable to use a whole roll. And so what I would advise someone to do is to use the tissue whilst it's still on the roll, and once they're finished, then they tear off, better not on the dotted line, but the key is you tear off not to make it usable. On the contrary, it's just to make it less offensive to the next user of the facilities. It goes on, Aval mishum kireya ein issur, elo k'shekireya o mafrid gufim rabim shenischabru. The Alter Rebbe's chiddush here is that the definition of kireya is dividing at a seam. Let's say you have or dividing where it has been joined. He says you've got a garment which is woven from many threads, and now you're breaking up that weave. But if it's a piece of paper, a piece of plastic, so then tearing a piece of paper, tearing a piece of plastic doesn't come under kireya according to the Alter Rebbe. And that's why you are allowed to tear the seal on a bottle, on a jar, etc. And that's his discussion over here. So coming back, to tear off a piece of plastic from a tablecloth, it would not be the melacha of kireya. But it would be, if you're making now a useful size of tablecloth, I would think it does come under metaken money. You're making something, a usable piece. Now, I want to share with you that in the Sefer Shabbos Halacha from Rav Forkash Shlita in Chelik Dalet, he has a discussion about this, and he spoke about this at the Yachi Kala 2 years ago, and he was of mind that just ripping off a piece from a roll of tablecloth, he didn't see that as making it into a usable size. I, amongst many others present, felt he was, I think he was being too lenient. But he does take a view that just tearing off he emphasizes, before Shabbos, prepare, but if you're stuck, he feels that you are allowed to tear off from a table, you pull off from the roll, not a precise amount. And then he says, ripping off very approximately would not be an issur of metaken moneh. He also, however, agrees, let's say you do have a length of cloth, and you need to cover two separate tables because they're different sides of the room. To tear that length of cloth into two pieces, to put one on the side, one either side of the room, that for sure he also agrees is not okay. But as I say, I'm quite hesitant to rely on this, although generally he's very respected Meir. And the issue is not kireya, the issue is not mechater, the issue is metaken mon. Let's move on. So some feedback. So last week we spoke about the bracha on cream cake, and I had learned something new, that the contemporary Sforim are writing to say 2 brachas on cream cake, and I had a picture of the Sefer of Rabbi Alashvili on Birsanen. In his table, he said first do a shahakal and then a mezoinus. And I was questioning because normally we make the more specific bracha and then the more general bracha. So why did he say to do a shahakol before the bracha mezainis? So a couple of people sent in comments suggesting, and I wrote to Rabbi Alashvili, which he responded. He's very good at responding, actually, and he said there is a little bit of room to say that if you make a bracha mezainis, it covers the cream also. So to avoid that suffix, better to make the bracha shahakol on the cream exclusively, and not have in mind the pastry, obviously, and then to make the bracha later on the pastry. So a couple of listeners sent in a similar comment. Okay, fine. It's negay for the next birthday. The other I got now this today. One of our listeners who listens to a recording sent me in this comment that we discussed about the minig of the Rebbe touching the oparoiches as he went in or out of the Beis Hamedrash, and so he mentions about, and I mentioned also about the Rebbe was noyek to just touch the mezuzah rather than kiss the mezuzah. So he pointed out of Hayom Yom of this very day, and that is that it says the Seder of Birchas HaTorah. That's in other words Dalad El. You touch with your talus at the beginning of the Kriyas HaTorah, and at the end, you kiss the talus at the spot which the talus touched the Sefer Torah. Then you turn slightly to the right, and you make the bracha, and you open the Sefer Torah, and the reading proceeds. So what I had mentioned last week, a hesitation whether when you touch something, does the kedusha of that thing go onto your finger that you're kissing your finger? How does it get transferred? So here you see in the Hayom Yom about touching the Sefer Torah and then kissing the talus. To which I responded that you're not allowed to touch the Sefer Torah with your fingers. It says so the best you can do is touch it with the talus. So therefore, you touch with the talus, but with the doesn't mean that in all other situations that the kedusha kind of transfers to your finger. Okay, fine. But he pointed out something very interesting. The Hayom Yom, there's a change here between the first edition and the third edition and subsequent. Tofshin Yud Zayin, that was the third edition, and there was a change in the Hayom Yom. And here you can see the text of the original Hayom Yom from Tofshin Gimel or Tofshin, yeah. Seder Birchas HaTorah, Roye, you just look, and then you see, in other words, you look at the parasha, you roll the Sefer Torah closed, turn slightly to the right, then you make the bracha, and then you open it up, and the reading proceeds. And now, so that was in Tofshin, the early edition. Tofshin Yud Zayin comes a new thing about touching the Sefer Torah with your talus, etc. And this you can, sorry about that. There we go. Here we have also in the addendum, in the back of the Hayom Yom, it points this out, the changes between the third print and the previous ones, that this whole bit about touching with the talus was added in the later editions of the Hayom Yom. So let's explain a couple of points here. What's the chiddush over here? The Munketscher Rov writes very, very sharply not to touch with your talus, not to touch the Sefer Torah. He is very concerned that people touch the Sefer Torah with their talus, and there may be a drop of saliva, and as you touch it, you may cause a smudge and ruin the Sefer Torah. And if it's Hashem's name, it's an even bigger problem because it's very difficult to correct it, etc. And he says, maximum, you touch the margin, don't touch the actual writing. And so this is Harkom Mashmalon. This is the chiddush which is written over here, that we do touch with a talus where the reading starts and ends. I want to say means touching and not swiping, and I find it very, very disturbing. Sometimes people go for Hagbe and they think they have to swipe the cloth on 3 amudim. There's no need to swipe it, and just touch it with the and one spot, but not to wipe it, because chas v'sholem, you could actually ruin the Sefer Torah by doing this. And I'm using this opportunity in case people who are listening who do this should know that they shouldn't, and share it with others. Anyway, so that's one thing, which is a chiddush. The other thing is, he says here about turning to the right somewhat. Interesting, and in the Hayom Yom Hamavur, he points out that actually the Ramos says you should turn to the left, and our minhag says we should turn to the right. And the explanation for that is very simple. That the way we are nohig is that the Baal Koira stands to the left, and the one who has the Aliyah stands to the right. The turning to your right slightly is that you're not reading your bracha from the Sefer Torah. You're looking away. There used to be a minhag, and that was the Alter Rebbe's personal minhag. The Baal Koira stood on the right, and the one who has the Aliyah stands on the left. When the Ramos says turn to the left, he's talking about that minhag. You're standing to the left. If you turn to your right slightly, you're looking into the Sefer Torah. You look to your left, and you're looking away from the Sefer Torah. Now that our minhag is that the one who has the Aliyah is standing on the right, so to turn away from the Sefer Torah, you turn slightly to your right, to turn away, so that people shouldn't get the impression that brachas ksuvas b'Torah, that the brachas are written in the Torah. So this is the reason for turning slightly to the right. But this for me was a chiddush about the this change in Hayom Yom, about the touching and kissing the talus, where the beginning and the end of the kriya. And just to add to that, here it says the beginning and the end. In the later years, we saw that Rebbe was nohig at the beginning of the Aliyah, beginning, end, and beginning. At the end of the year, end, beginning, and end. That's how he was nohig. All right, we're already a little bit almost over time, and I think I'm going to finish off with that and wish you all a guten Shabbos, a guten Chodesh, a ksiva v'chsima toiva, l'shono toiva u'mesukah.
Thank you.
Good Shabbos.
Stop recording.
Yashikoyach. Good Shabbos. See you.